All right, today we have another episode from the archives with one of my incredible guests. Enjoy. Welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast, a show about the incredible people dedicated to helping those who've experienced trauma. My name is Guy McPherson, and my mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to inspire each of us to help those around us. All right, guys, welcome back again. My name is Guy McPherson, and so excited to get going this morning with my guest, Manuela Mischke-Reeds. Manuela, are you ready to start?
Yes, sure. Thank you.
You're welcome. So Manuela is a licensed somatic psychotherapist. She is an international teacher of psychology and trains health professionals in California, Australia, New Zealand, Israel, and Europe, and starting in China next year. Manuela co-directs and teaches at the Hakomi Institute of California that hosts her trauma training From Trauma to Dharma. That starts up again in April 2016. We'll have that linked up at the show notes page. This training integrates current neuroscience of trauma theory, somatic and mindfulness-based interventions with Dharmic teachings and embodied meditation practices. Her recent book, 8 Keys to Practicing Mindfulness, Practical Strategies for Emotional Health and Well-Being, has been published by Norton in 2015. Awesome. All right, Manuela, obviously just a little bit about you. Take a moment, share with our listeners where you're calling from, where you're from too, and then let's dive in.
Thank you, Guy. Well, I'm originally from Germany, actually, and came to the U.S. about 27 years ago. And I'm calling from Northern California. That's where I reside and practice, so Menlo Park area.
Nice. So not too far from me in Oakland.
That's right, across the bay.
All right. So this podcast here really is about, inspiring clinicians, trauma therapists, people just getting into this field. And we start, Manuela, with a quote, a mantra, an idea of what has gotten you excited, what's inspired you. Share with our listeners either a quote or an excerpt, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. There's a quote that's kind of guided me ever since I've come here to the U.S., and I was a student at Naropa University. And I'm probably going to not do it justice. I don't have it in front of me, but basically it's a quote by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, the founder of Naropa, and he said the job of the health professional is to inspire full human beingness. And that inspiring a full human beingness has been kind of my guiding post as I studied and practiced psychotherapy with trauma clients in particular. So that's been, I know it's a short quote, but I felt like when I was training as a clinician, there was a lot of emphasis on skill and on techniques, but not so much on what really motivates the therapist to wanting to engage in healing. Excuse me. And so that quote spoke to me because I felt like what needed to happen was to come back to that full human beingness quality. And that's what I saw in my early training, the kind of suffering that trauma clients were going through was actually taking them away from their full human beingness. And they didn't feel complete. They didn't even feel human at times. And it also speaks to the kind of relationship that I found most healing in trauma therapy. So that quote, in a way, sums it up, that I feel like it's guided me personally in my personal life, but also professionally.
Yeah, I love that quote. And, despite despite the fact that it's short, but it's just so powerful. And I love the emphasis on, full human beingness. It's something really, we haven't talked so much about on this podcast. I'm really glad you're kind of setting the context here. Obviously, there's the topic of skill and what we need to learn, and also the desire to do this work. But we really haven't talked a lot about kind of focus the spotlight, if you will, on what does it mean to, from what you're saying, to be full human beingness. What does that mean? When did that become important to you or resonant for you? This kind of teasing that part out, if you will.
Well, as I mentioned, as a student, it was an inspiration that there was more to therapy healing than just technique. So it made me, I was a very young clinician. I was 25 when I started out. And when I was kind of brimming with this energy of wanting to heal. And that quote inspired me that this was the motivation from which to start from. But when it really came into action, I moved, as I said, my early training was here in the US. After Germany was at Naropa University, and then I went to the Bay Area and got another degree in somatic psychology. And one of my first internships was with political torture survivors. That was my early training ground as a clinician. And I was referred to a client that had suffered from Cambodia, that had suffered political torture. And there was a very pivotal moment where she turns to me and she says, they could break my bones, but they couldn't break my spirit. And that was another quote in a way that guided me, but it matched with that full human beingness quote as well. And I got it, that it was like, this is what trauma healing is about. It's about helping people to find their spirit, their connection with life, their body, hope, their will, and to make them feel whole in their dignity and their integrity. Because so much of trauma experiences puts us exactly in the opposite. People feel broken and shattered and disorganized and dysregulated and you name it. And I felt like when that client sat in front of me and looked at me and said this to me, that they could break my bones but not my spirit, I realized that quote had carried me to the doorstep with this client. And I realized, this is what this is about. It's about bringing back dignity and connection to self, body, and others. That's the gist of it, yeah.
Did you feel that, you talked about yourself brimming with kind of passion and energy to heal. Did you feel that in some way there was maybe a gap or a chasm between being able to implement the skills you were learning? I mean, obviously you were learning skills, you were being educated. Did you feel there was more you needed to do to hone that concept of full human beingness again? How did that come about for you?
Oh, absolutely. And I was very lucky that I had the Naropa training in my bones early on as a young person. I only appreciated it really years and years later, what kind of incredible education I'd gotten there. And it was a little unusual. I had come from a more traditional psych background in Germany and to the University of Hamburg, and that was more traditional per se. But the seed that got planted back then was really meditation practice. And it was the kind of meditation practice that was referencing the body. And that became a guiding post in my rescue as a clinician, because in my toolkit of what I teach now to other clinicians. But what it was is that I had learned a very powerful tool to take care of my own mind and body with sitting with very heavy-duty trauma. As I said, a young clinician being thrown, I call it the wolf's den, at a hospital here in the Bay Area where I was working with the torture survivors, and I was really over my head. I was way too inexperienced, way too young, and my toolkit wasn't as savvy yet. But what I did have was I already had a pretty stable meditation practice. So that helped me. It helped me to reference my own experience, to be calm in the midst of overwhelm, to be reading people's affective states pretty accurately, and also kind of to spread a kind of atmosphere of warmth and quiet that was like a refuge, especially for those torture survivor groups that I was working with back then. So that quality of being able to see when my mind was healthy or spinning out or getting anxious, and the capacity to then know how to come back to myself proved to be the most essential skill in navigating the trauma world with clients.
There's something so powerful about that, Manuela. And the way you're talking, it makes it sound as though that's the rudder, in a sense, the kind of underpinning, the superstructure, if you will, of our practice and the work we do as trauma therapists, as clinicians in general. Why is it? Why is that a missing piece in training in general? I mean, obviously at the Neuropa Institute, it was a focus there, but I speak to a lot of therapists and especially the people who have been doing this for so long always come back to, we've got to do our own work. We have to develop a meditation practice. But why is that a piece that, in a sense, in general, we're missing as a field?
That's a really excellent question. And again, I've been so lucky because I've had that early training, and the second piece of that early training was also meeting the Hakomi method, which is a mindfulness-based or experiential psychotherapy work. So I was in good hands and didn't even know that back then. But why that is so important is because I do think that underneath there's a biological process of trauma here. So when our client goes into what I call trauma states, when they get activated and dysregulated into fear, anxiety, depression, they go into a different physiological and emotional, and I would even say spiritual state. They venture away from their own groundedness in their body and their own kind of knowing of who they are in that moment, and they're referencing traumatic memory, and they're feeling a high threshold of anxiety and so on. That state is what I would call, in parentheses, is highly contagious. Because as mammals, we are wired to connect, but we're also wired to tune into one another for survival. So if one member of our herd is getting anxious, it alerts everybody else that danger is near. Now, and that's how we, as mammals have survived. Now, in the therapy office, and our coiffed, beautiful therapy office, the biology doesn't leave. The biology is still there. And especially if I'm sitting in a kind of 6-foot radius of my client, our bodies, our heart rhythms, our breaths are beginning to link. There's been some evidence on that. The Heart Math Institute has done some research, and others, that when we're in a close kind of what I call somatic kinesphere with another, we are beginning to link and tune in to the biology of the other. And so when my client goes into a trauma state, that contagious trauma state, even the subtlest level, they begin to transmit that kind of, sounds kind of out there, but that frequency of anxiety, they begin to transmit it. I feel it in my own body. And I might not know it at first. I might just feel irritated or sleepy well, usually not sleepy, but irritated or anxious myself, or I want to turn away, or I want to make the client wrong. I want to push it away. And that experience of getting triggered or a little activated, if we're not able to recognize it, we go right into it, and we go into countertransference, and we go into a somatic countertransference, meaning that we're beginning to either match it or want to do something about it, hurry the client out of it, fix them, you name it, the whole gamut. But if I have the ground of meditation, if I have learned how to stabilize my own mind, know how to reference my own body experience, know how to read my own body experience, I can feel that contagion coming in. I can feel suddenly, there's a little flutteriness in my belly. My chest is constricting. My jaw is really tightening up. And then I can begin to track the cues of my own body and then look at the cues of my client. I can pick up the body cues and can track them. And because I have the ground of meditation, I have practiced over and over and over again, I can now pretty much accurately read what has now been contagious, what I've taken on, and what's mine. And at the same time, through those, especially the embodied meditation techniques I want to stress here, when I begin to really feel into it, I can begin to use breath. I can begin to kind of drop a little bit deeper into my sits bones. I can plant my feet on the ground. And I can begin to resource myself through a kind of meditative repertoire that I have practiced over and over again in the moment while I'm working. And I think that is a really potent application of mindfulness and meditation practice. So it doesn't take me away. I don't have to go into a retreat or huddle in the corner and practice. I actually am doing it right there with my client. And I do believe that that is a very effective way to then work with the client's trauma state, because in that moment, it allows me to regulate this state through my own body state and mind state. And then it goes the other way. So if I'm taking a breath, if I'm able to reference my own experience and, quote, not buy into the contagion, then the client begins to get calmed down, because, again, biologies are linked, because when I'm calm, chances are my client calms down. And if they begin to get anxious and it meets with calmness, I can bring to them the lens of, you're very activated right there, or it seems to really rile you up. I'm noticing your chest getting tight there. Then they begin to get curious, because there's no judgment, there's nowhere to amplify it, and it begins to, the activation of trauma itself, or the trauma memory, we can now work with. And that's a very hopeful experience and message for the client. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, Manuela, you are good. This is awesome. I mean, this is why I'm doing this podcast. I mean, that is just a mini workshop in really the benefits, the need for us as clinicians to have a practice. And I just think it was so beautifully articulated, and we can hear the force with which, or maybe even is the kind of laser-like focus we then can intervene, right, from a calmer, more grounded state. I mean, I just think that was beautifully articulated. How did you get here? How did you get to this field of trauma? Tell us a story, Manuela. I mean, you're doing amazing. I love having you on here.
Thank you. Well, a long story, obviously. I make it short, but as all personal healing stories go, it's a crooked path, right? So there's obviously my own story in there. I came to Naropa because I wanted to train, but really I wanted to heal. I had my own my own shadows, my own journey about it, and I was, again, lucky to find the loving arms of Naropa and also the Hakomi method that provided such a gentle and caring container. And when I came out of Naropa, I really did feel that kind of brimming quality. I felt full with the teachings, with the Dharma that I had encountered, with the techniques I had learned. I actually studied dance therapy there. So I came from the moving arts. I was studying also movement in Germany. I was a dancer originally. And it was through the moving body that I felt like healing needed to happen. And I came then to the Bay Area and deepened more into Hakomi. And at the same time, I also studied with Anna Halpern and studied more expressive arts. And I began to put together the kind of mindful quality of Hakomi and the meditation practices that I had encountered with the expressive arts and dance therapy. And I was kind of really steeped in it. And I began to then go through another degree program at CIS in somatic psychology. And that's when I met a wonderful teacher named Mariana Ekberg. She wrote a book on victims of cruelty. And her whole passion was around torture survivors. And she was the one that kind of roped me in early on to start sitting with torture survivors. And she said, here, why don't you try this out? And she started a clinic. And as I said, I was so over my head, and it was good in a way, because, I wouldn't recommend this experience, to be honest, this is not a good way to start out. But what it did teach me is that I had to rely on what I did know, which was the body, which was a complete faith in the body's healing capacity. That I knew because I had been so much studying movement and knew the healing power of movement and the body. And I knew that the path towards healing was somewhere through the body. And being in that 2-year cauldron with her in that clinic, it brought me to some very existential places within myself. I had to do my own healing work. And also, it made me kind of really question human nature. There was a time when I got very despairing working with these torture survivors. And I remember coming home, and I've been filled with the stories of the day, of horrors, happening in countries I'd never been. I worked with, mostly at that time, with Cambodia, Vietnamese refugees. And I felt really overwhelmed, and I felt like the kind of darkness of humanity descend on me. I wouldn't trust. I was joking at that time. I'd rather hang out with cats than with humans, and But then I realized that there was something really wrong with that worldview, because it's not who I was. I was cheerful. I love human beings. I like human connection. I think that's where healing happens. But I would withdraw, and basically what I was experiencing was the first round of vicarious traumatization. And I was being traumatized working with this trauma population. And my mind got very dark. As I said, I would retreat. I would retreat from my friends. I would retreat from the world. I would immerse myself in just trauma psychology books, which was not a good idea. Yeah. And I wasn't enjoying my life. And I wasn't taking joy from life. And I even let go of, at that point I was a Buddhist meditation practitioner. At that point I even got mad at meditation. And I felt there was no solace anywhere. And so I was experiencing a kind of darkness that many trauma clients experience, the kind of dark vortex in a way. And I had to come back to a very bare bones experience of the body. And that's where I met a wonderful woman named Emily Conrad, who developed a movement practice called Continuum. And this is about the most gentlest, kindest, inner breathing, moving work I've ever encountered. And it was through her that I would lie on the floor and feel my breath and feel my connection to earth, and basically trust again in the goodness of my own body and life and human connection. And it was a very powerful, almost initiation. At that point, I wanted to give up doing therapy because I thought I'm not good at it. I can't help anybody. And it was through that movement work that I began to heal that faith. And I began to say, there's always breath, there's always movement, there's always connection with the earth. And that really kind of created a foundation in which I began to then go through a second round with, I left the clinic at the hospital and I began to build a private practice and started to teach. And then, of course, my practice was filled with all kinds of different trauma clients, you name it, from car accidents to kidnapping to sexual abuse to you name it, a whole variety. But I had found my ground, and my ground was my own body, and it was the connection to the earth. And as soon as I had that, I felt like I could sit with my clients very, very differently. And the skills now were in service of that connection. And so that was a very, very different way of working. And then later on, I deepened more with Peter Levine. And, Mariana was also at the time a student and a supporter of Peter Levine in the early days of Peter. But there were all these wonderful people that I studied with and learned, but it was really through the continuum work and the body work that I began to have this unshakable connection to earth, a resource within myself that I could always at any time access, no matter what was in front of me. And I began to realize that as a therapist, it was no longer about healing others, but again, back to the quote, inspiring others in their healing journey. Mm-hmm. And that's really all I could do. And it relieved me. It wasn't, because in my graduate school, I was told, you're the therapist, you need to help people, you need to heal them, you need to do this and that. And it was too much. Mm-hmm. And it was a great experience to be with the torture survivors because their healing journey was so beyond my own reference point. The suffering was so great. It was impossible for me to heal them. And it was great learning. And getting burned out was a great learning because I realized I needed to find a different way to sit with that kind of suffering. And it came through a more dharmic lens where I had the connection with the earth, a larger resource, and really an embodied practice. And as long as I had that, I could sit with pretty much any kind of suffering.
Yeah, what I am getting from listening to you, Manuela, and in telling these really amazing stories that you're just sharing with us, is an emphasis on your own inner experience and your own healing, and almost as if it's from that point that you can work to try to heal others. And I think there's something so powerful in your statement, which was, there's no way I could heal those people. I mean, there's something so powerful in that. And it almost, I could hear a collective exhalation from the listener saying, oh, okay, I don't have to heal. Because there's this sense that we need to heal, or there's this common thought that, okay, I need to fix, I have to fix. And I think you were talking about this before when, you were sensing that oftentimes as therapists, we want to get in there because we can't, maybe handle it our own selves. We need to fix and tweak that and, prevent the client from, getting out of the window of tolerance and kind of squeeze them in that box. But from what you're saying, there's this great, powerful, nurturing emphasis on my own inner human kindness, in a sense, human beingness.
That's right.
What would you share with our listeners in terms of kind of an early clinical error you made, what you learned from that?
Well, going back to that same time frame, I seem to be referencing that particular training ground there. I was working with a group of Vietnamese PTSD survivors, all men. And that in itself was interesting, the whole cultural difference, language barrier. They spoke very little English, and it was an interesting, the field has come a long way. I was given literally almost a broom closet in the hospital to work with this group because there was not much value at that time on the body or the kind of more somatic focus on trauma work. So they said, oh yeah, go ahead, go in the broom closet and do your work. And one of the interventions I did was, I knew they were all, one of the hallmarks of PTSD is insomnia, and flashbacks at night. So these men were suffering terribly, not being able to sleep and being haunted by these horrible memories. And because the way I was thrown into that setting, I wasn't briefed well enough. I did not know some of the background and the history of some of these men that came in with all these dysregulated sleep patterns, anxiety, and so on. And so I would do an intervention, which is common for a young zealot therapist. You have a few techniques and you want to apply them on everybody. And I would put them down on the floor and have them, because I thought, they needed to all relax. They were so stressed out. So I had them lie down on the floor and then I put some lovely music on, and they were grateful to be resting on the floor. But the music had some water elements to it, like, soothing kind of water sounds, which for anybody would be lovely, and it would make them drift into sleep and relaxation. Well, within about 7 minutes, I had about 25 men being extremely dysregulated, tense bodies, eyes wide open, and I've basically managed to completely reactivate 25 men into their trauma.
Oh, wow.
And of course, what I didn't do is I didn't check my facts good enough and didn't inquire the kind of torture that they had received, and I also didn't involve them in their choices of the music. I just basically had my little agenda, and my agenda was soothing music that was good for me. Well, these poor gentlemen were actually tortured through water torture. So they were, and I'll make it very simple, not to make it too graphic, but they were basically put in cages near the ocean, and the tide would come in and almost drown them. Mm-hmm. And so you can imagine that the sound of water was not a welcome sound. and would highly activate them back into these trauma states. So the lesson was to, first of all, you need to know the history of the clients. You need to check your facts a little bit if you can, and also involve. I think this is the biggest learning piece, and that I really believe in strongly. You need to involve your clients in even the smallest decisions in the therapy. So I could have just said, what kind of music do you like? Or give them a little sample to hear, or had a little discussion about music, or bring in their own music that they could have related to. So give them a little bit of a control and participation in the kind of interventions they wanted. And because trauma is so much about having your choices being taken away. And I didn't. I basically had a little agenda and a little program, and what's good for me is good for you, and that's a very bad mistake to make. So it was very cute. Afterwards, they came and said, Doctor, I'm not a doctor, but they would say, as a matter of respect, they said, Doctor, your music is not so good. Could we have a different music?
Oh, man.
They were very respectful. They were so kind towards me. You know, I had totally blown it, basically.
Yeah.
And they were very kind and gracious towards me. And I said, oh, and then I realized what had happened. And I said, what kind of music would you like? And they said, well, we like German music, like Mozart and Brahms. And so they wanted classical, structured music. And after that, I used that music, and it worked beautifully. And then they called me the sleep doctor, because I would sleep for 15 minutes in my session, my group work with them. And I thought I had terribly failed, but I realized that they were looking forward to those 15 minutes of rest. That was the highlight of the week, actually. So it became a beautiful intervention in the long run, but it was a disaster when I first did it.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that story. I mean, just this is a powerful story and a kind of a gold nugget of wisdom take home there. Let's move on. I want to get to my favorite question, but before we do, let's just kind of jump in here and take a moment to thank our sponsors. Therapy Partners' intuitive technology streamlines every administrative task. Clinicians increase revenue 20% the first year. Save time, earn more, thrive in practice, and join the movement. Therapy Partner is the nation's leader in developing advanced technology and business education. Start today. Trauma Therapist podcast listeners receive a 60-day free trial. Visit therapypartner.com and use discount code podcast. That's therapypartner.com. Use discount code podcast. Want to increase your skills as a trauma therapist? Watch Master Therapist in action for as low as $29 a month with psychotherapy.net video streaming. Think Netflix for therapists. For 25% discount, go to psychotherapy.net/trauma. Psychotherapy.net. Great therapists never stop learning. All right, Manuela, you've shared some really incredible stories, inspiring stories, and the way you articulate the work you do is it's phenomenal. I love it, and it's really the idea of what I had in mind when I started this podcast. So I really appreciate what you've done here so far. What's your why? What keeps you going in this work? Mm-hmm.
That's a really good question, and it's an evolving question because, I've been doing this now for 25 years, and the why has changed. And it's a very different why now than when I first was that clinician that I was describing to you in my early stages. In the beginning, it was all about helping others, and I thought I needed to help others, and of course, not realizing that I needed to help myself first. But I thought about, this is what I was trained for, and I need to help others. And then when I realized I needed to help myself, it was about then I thought I needed to be a very savvy clinician and introduce change. And and then through those burnout stages, I realized, as I said earlier, that I wasn't really, that I couldn't help others, that all I could do was to inspire their own healing. And so as I was going through my own acceptance stages of my own healing and acceptance stages of the client's healing, and there's a very pivotal, I want to tell a very short story, another one in that time frame, those early years, where I attended a workshop with Joanna Macy, who's a very beloved Buddhist scholar and teacher and an amazing human being. And I was very despairing about my own trauma work. I felt like I couldn't make a dent, basically. I couldn't help all these people that are coming to me with all their suffering. And I was asking her for advice. I said, what should I do? And she said to me, she looked at me then with the utmost kindness, and she said, what makes you think that you should be taking away somebody else's suffering? That's rather arrogant. And she said it was such a kindness. It was not, but it stung, of course. You know, the words helping others and arrogance doesn't quite go together in my head at that time. And it stung a little bit. And I literally took a whole year to think about that. But she was absolutely right. I realized at that stage that it was arrogant for me to take away the suffering of another. And I began to realize that it was much more of a journey. And so the why then became the kind of journey quality, that I was on a journey with a client towards healing. But how that would look like and the particulars was going to be revealed. And then becoming a parent made a big difference. I became a kinder person. And I began, again, it's been a journey of acceptance. So the why now, and then another person that I met that was very powerful in my journey was Reggie Ray, meditation teacher, who taught me the meditating with the body. And it was through all those components that I became the why now is a very different motivation. So as I said, the early stages, the motivation was I want to change people, I want to help people, I want to get them out of their suffering. And it became about, no, I want to hold somebody's hand on their journey of suffering, and I want them to discover their own way out. I give them tools, I give them my knowledge, I give them my wisdom, but most importantly, I will hold them with kindness and compassion, and already with a sense of that they're whole already, that trauma is not what defines them. And so the why now is a much more joyous and not a burnout way, because I can now joyfully sit with somebody who is in suffering and already trust that they can go through that, no matter how dark it gets. So the why now is really just being helpful. I just want to be helpful now in a kind and generous way. So that's my motivation now, to be a helpful clinician, a helpful another human being that has obviously some skill and some tools and some knowledge of the path ahead. So it's like I can see the long range path. The client who starts out can't, of course. And I think that's my motivation now. I get a lot of joy now knowing that clients can make it through. So it's a very different motivation than when I started out, and certainly not what I was taught in graduate school.
Yeah, I mean, there just seems so much wisdom in that. I mean, especially listening to you talk about your journey and the kind of ups and downs and the hardships and the turmoil that you yourself went through, and to come out, on the other end, if you will, it almost sounds, easy, but we know it's not.
Oh no.
We know it's not.
No.
And I think oftentimes we know when we're in the presence of wisdom, when something does sound and maybe look so easy, but we know it's not. Obviously there's been so many teachings and kind of gold nuggets is what I like to call them throughout this talk here. But what would you share? What would you say to therapists who are beginning their journey, who want to get into the trauma field and work with individuals who've been traumatized?
We need you. There's so much trauma and suffering out in this world. We need you. Don't give up and resource yourself. So get good support structure. Obviously, supervision, good clinical supervision is very, very important. Being around mentors that have traveled this journey that you trust is very, very important. Good guides along the way. That's paramount, absolutely paramount. But the guides obviously there needs to be a good clinical guidance, but the guides can come from many different ways. So it might be the Dharma teacher, it might be another spiritual teacher. To get guidance from the heart and to keep that alive is very important, because you can get hardened in this job. as I said, you can get overwhelmed by the suffering, or you can just don't know what to do, or you feel incompetent, or in the beginning. But I think to keep your heart open, and that's really important. So whatever cultivates the open-heartedness is really important. And then for me personally, I think what I say to all the people that I train is to have a body practice. And if it's movement, if it's Tai Chi, if it's yoga, you name it, but some way where you begin to cultivate your relationship with your body in that ground where you can come back to over and over again, so that you know how to resource yourself, that you can read when you're getting spun out, when you're getting triggered, that you have a place to come back to that nourishes you. And I think that's absolutely key. And I think that's what kept me through all the years healthy and sane and deepening in my own work with people, that I had always a body practice that I would several body practice that I would come back to. So those will be the key elements: good supervision, good support structure, a lot of resources for your mind and for your body, and have a playful attitude as well. I think play is very important. Enjoying life, even if you're dealing with very hard clientele, to actually enjoy your life. Just because your client is suffering doesn't mean you need to suffer as well. That's a mistake of a lot of young clinicians, I think. And it's important to play and be frivolous and enjoy that what life's giving you. That's really, because that joyful, hopeful energy, the client that's sitting there in whatever space they're in, they need that. It's feeding ground for them. They need hope. They need that there's goodness and joy out there, And
I'll have each of those linked up at the show notes page at westcoasttraumaproject.com. Hit on the podcast tab and Manuela's episode will come right up. So your most recent book, 8 Keys to Practicing Mindfulness, Practical Strategies for Emotional Health and Well-Being, we'll have linked up also. Mm-hmm. You also have training coming up. Talk about that, please.
In 2016, I'm going to start a new training called From Trauma to Dharma, and it's got 2 levels. There's a 5-week online component, which has a lot of the didactic, theoretic, because there's a lot of theory to know about in the background on trauma. It's got the, about the neuroscience, the psychophysiology, also introducing people to the beginning practices of, all these ground practices I was referencing today. And then it's got level 2 is 2 5-day intensives where we meet in person. And I'm going to be doing a lot of demonstrations of the work. And the work is very much peppered. As the ground of this is the Dharmic teachings of how to be with suffering and how to come back into your body. And so a lot of meditating with the body practices. This is the work of Reggie Ray, is going to be introduced here, and really steeping the clinician into the skill how to work with trauma, and then how to resource themselves and sit what I call in the therapist seat. So that trauma training will happen next year.
Okay, and we can link up to that on the show notes page as well. There's a link on your website, Manuela, for this training? Mm-hmm. Okay. So
yes, mindingthepresent.com. Yes. Great. There's 2 websites. There's mindingthepresent.com, and then there's also Hakomi, California, hakomica.org. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay. So what is one go-to book that's inspired you, whether trauma-related or not, that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I'm going to recommend a book that's not a trauma book. I'm sure you got lots of wonderful, I'm sure Peter Levine's books I always love. I mean, you can't go wrong. I love them. I always pick them up back over and over again. I adore Peter's work. Meditating with the Body by Reggie Ray is a book. And that's more the inspirational, coming back to yourself, the resource, the ground I was talking about. Given what I talked about today, I think this will be a great recommendation. So Meditating with the Body, Reggie Ray.
Okay. Again, we'll have that linked up. Manuela, so we've got your website. We'll have those links available at the show notes page. I want to thank you so much for doing this. It's been a pleasure, and I know our listeners are as joyous as I am from listening to you share your experiences. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, take care.